In 538 AD, a Roman statesman wrote a letter that nobody believed. His name was Cassiodorus, and he wrote it from Ravenna. The sun, he said, had turned a sickly blue. At noon, the people of Rome cast no shadows. The moon had gone empty, and the seasons collapsed together. A winter without storms gave way to spring without warmth. A summer arrived, carrying no heat at all. He described the sky stretched like a hide over the world, blocking light and color and hope. Historians read that letter for 14 centuries and called it exaggeration. They dismissed it as poetic flourish from a dramatic Roman politician. Nobody checked whether that extraordinary claim was true. Nobody tested it against the physical record of the earth. Nobody asked whether Cassiodorus was simply writing down what he saw. Then in the 1990s, a scientist in Ireland cut into an ancient oak tree. What he found inside those rings changed everything. Cassiodorus had been telling the truth all along, and the event he described was far worse than anyone imagined. You need to understand what happened next, because what Cassiodorus described was not a local weather event. It was a global catastrophe that lasted over a century, killed tens of millions, and collapsed civilizations on 4 continents. Most people have never heard of it. In March of 536, Constantinople began experiencing darkened skies and rapidly dropping temperatures. This was not gradual. There was no warning. A dense fog visible across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia appeared almost overnight and refused to lift. Byzantine historian Procopius, who lived through it, wrote that the sun gave its light without brightness. He compared it to a permanent eclipse. The beams it shed, he said, were not clear. Procopius was not the only witness. The Syriac patriarch Michael the Syrian, drawing on earlier sources, recorded that the darkness lasted 18 months. Each day the sun shone for roughly 4 hours. Even that light was only a feeble shadow. Fruits did not ripen. Wine tasted like vinegar from sour grapes. In China, there are records of summer snow, not a brief flurry. Enough snowfall to destroy the harvest and trigger famine. The Irish chronicles record 3 consecutive years without bread from 536 to 539. And in the ancient Mandan Book of Kings, an entry for this period captures the desperation with eerie precision. 873 grams of grain could not be purchased for 43 grams of gold. Grain was not expensive. It was extinct. Gold was not devalued. It was irrelevant. You could hold a fortune in your hand and still starve. These are not fringe accounts. These are the voices of senators, church leaders, imperial historians, and court archivists from 3 continents, all describing the same impossible event at the same moment in time. And for over 1,000 years, mainstream scholarship treated every single one of them as metaphor. That dismissal is itself a kind of erasure, not active suppression, something quieter, a collective decision that the testimony did not fit, so the testimony must be wrong. The first crack in that consensus came in the early 1990s. Mike Bailey, a dendrochronologist at Queen's University, Belfast, was studying growth patterns in ancient Irish oak. Tree rings are nature's most precise thermometer. Each ring records a year of growth, and narrow rings mean cold, difficult years. At exactly 536, Bailey found rings so thin they suggested a catastrophic drop in sunlight. Another sharp contraction appeared at 542. Something enormous had happened, and the trees had recorded it with annual precision for 1,500 years while historians looked the other way. But the trees were only the beginning. In 2013, A team drilled a 72-meter ice core from the Colnefetti Glacier in the Swiss Alps. That cylinder of ice contained over 2,000 years of atmospheric history. Every volcanic eruption, every dust storm, every season of human pollution, frozen in layers thin enough to read by the week. The team was led by Harvard historian Michael McCormick and glaciologist Paul Majewski from the University of Maine. They used a laser to carve 120-micron slivers of ice, roughly 50,000 samples per meter. Each sliver was tested for a dozen elements in ice. From the spring of 536, a graduate student named Laura Hartman found 2 microscopic particles of volcanic glass. She bombarded those shards with X-rays to identify their chemical fingerprint. They matched volcanic rocks from Iceland. McCormick's conclusion, published in the journal Antiquity in 2018, was blunt. 536 was the worst year to be alive, and the reason mattered. A massive Icelandic eruption had thrown enough sulfate aerosol into the upper atmosphere to block sunlight across the entire northern hemisphere. Now, here is where someone reasonable pushes back. Volcanic eruptions happen. Mount Tambora erupted in 1815 and caused the famous year without a summer. Civilization survived. People adapted. Why should 536 be any different? The answer is scale. Tambora was one eruption. The 536 event was followed by a second massive eruption in 540 and a third in 517. 3 catastrophic eruptions in 11 years. The temperature did not drop for a season. It dropped for a century. Summer temperatures fell by 2.5 degrees Celsius after the first eruption. The second pushed them down another 2.7 degrees. That does not sound dramatic until you understand the consequences. 2.5 degrees means no harvest. It means summer snow in China. It means 3 years without bread in Ireland. It means the coldest decade in 2,300 years. It means the beginning of something researchers did not even bother to name until 2016, the late antique Little Ice Age. 124 years of global cooling from 536 to roughly 600 years. A climate catastrophe that reshaped the world. It had no name until 8 years ago. And then came the plague. 5 years after the sun vanished in 541, the disease appeared at the port of Pelusium in Egypt. It was Yinia pestis, the same bacterium that would later cause the Black Death. Researchers confirmed this through DNA analysis in 2013, with direct evidence published as recently as 2025. The connection to the volcanic winter is not coincidence. Famine had weakened immune systems across 3 continents. The climate shift drove rodent populations into new territories, carrying infected fleas with them. The plague reached Constantinople by spring of 542. At its peak, 5,000 people were dying every day in the imperial capital alone. Some accounts place it at 10,000 on the worst days. The Byzantine historian Procopius describes bodies stuffed into the towers of city walls packed with quick climb. When the towers overflowed, corpses were loaded onto ships, pushed into the Sea of Marmara, and set ablaze. Vast burial pits were dug and still could not keep pace with the dead. The city came to a standstill. Fruit supplies collapsed. Law and order disintegrated. Roughly 40% of Constantinople's population died in the initial outbreak alone. Emperor Justinian himself contracted the disease. He survived. His empire did not. Justinian had been on the verge of reunifying the Roman Empire. His armies had nearly retaken Italy and the entire western Mediterranean coast. The plague ended that dream permanently. By 568, the Lombards invaded northern Italy, and the project collapsed, What might have been the restored Roman Empire became the fragmented medieval world. Prupius left one more detail that cuts through the centuries. Even as farmers died by the thousands, Justinian demanded the annual tax, not just from the living, but for their deceased neighbors as well. The machinery of empire grinding forward over the bodies of its own citizens. But the devastation did not stop at the borders of Bantium. This is where the scale becomes difficult to absorb. You have probably heard the phrase Dark Ages. You were probably taught it referred to a vague cultural decline after Rome fell. It was not vague. It had a start date. It had a cause, and it struck everywhere at once. In Mexico, the city of Teotihuacan had a population exceeding 125,000. It was the largest city in the Americas, larger than any European city of its time. Its Pyramid of the Sun was one of the great architectural achievements of the ancient world. Around 550, its own residents torched the temples along the Avenue of the Dead. Not an invasion, an uprising from within. Archaeological evidence shows a sharp rise in child malnutrition during the 6th century. The volcanic winter had brought drought. Crops failed. The people blamed their rulers, the ones who were supposed to intercede with the gods. The gods had not answered. So the people burned the temples down. In Peru, the Moshe civilization collapsed as extreme weather shifted between droughts and floods, destroying infrastructure. In Scandinavia, researchers estimate population losses of up to 50%. Settlements were abandoned. Entire communities disappeared. The Avars declined. Mongol tribes began migrating westward. The Sasanian Empire weakened. The Gupta Empire fell. On every inhabited continent, the same pattern. Famine, migration, war, collapse, not in sequence. Simultaneously, a global civilizational reset, triggered by volcanic ash and sustained by plague. The plague itself did not end in 549. It returned in waves for over 2 centuries, with the last recorded cases around 750. By the time it was truly over, the ancient world was gone. What came after was simpler, smaller, and it had forgotten what came before. I want to stay with Scandinavia for a moment because what happened there reveals something most accounts of 536 ignore entirely. In 1999, a Danish researcher named Morten Axboe published a paper in the journal Medieval Archaeology. He had been studying gold hoards from the migration period. Large deposits of gold deliberately buried across Scandinavia. These were not hidden for safekeeping. There were no markings to indicate retrieval. They were sacrifices. Axboe connected the timing of these deposits to 536. His conclusion was that Scandinavian elites were burying their wealth to beg the gods to bring the sun back. Think about that. An entire ruling class across a vast region reaching the same desperate conclusion, that the only remaining option was to give everything they had to the ground and pray. When archaeologists find those gold hoards today, they are not finding treasure. They're finding prayers. And the ice core record tells the rest of the financial story. After 536, lead pollution in the Colonnetti core drops to nearly zero. Lead is a byproduct of silver mining. When it vanishes from the atmosphere, it means mining has stopped completely. Economic activity halted, and it does not return until approximately 640. That is 100 years of economic collapse. Not estimated from texts, not inferred from archaeological guesswork, but measured in the chemistry of alpine ice. By 660, another lead spike appears, marking the moment European economies switched from gold currency to silver. The entire monetary system of Western civilization was rewritten. The mines that funded the new silver economy have been traced to Mel in Aquitaine, France. A century of darkness and then recovery begins at a specific mine in a specific region, at a specific moment you can pinpoint in ice. There is one more layer to this that I almost did not include. Not because it is unverifiable, but because it sounds too clean, too perfect. The kind of connection that makes you hesitate precisely because it fits so well. In 2007, Swedish archaeologist Bo Gland published research arguing that the events of 536 were the direct historical inspiration for the Norse myths of Fimbulwinter and Ragnarok. 3 successive winters with no summer between them. The death of the sun, the end of the gods, the destruction of the world. That is not mythology. That is what it looked like from the ground when volcanic ash blocked the sky for years and half your people died. Gland and his colleague Neil Price expanded the argument in 2012 and again in 2015. They documented something particularly haunting. After the end of the 6th century, the sun symbol disappears from Scandinavian art. It had been a central motif for generations. After 536, they stopped carving it as if the memory was something they could not bear to depict. Then, in January of 2025, researchers at the University of Copenhagen published something remarkable. 4,900 years ago, Neolithic people on the Danish island of Bornholm had done something hauntingly similar. During an earlier volcanic event around 2900 BC, they sacrificed hundreds of flat stones engraved with sun motifs. The senior researcher called it proof that depositions honoring the sun are an ancient human pattern repeated across millennia. Humans watching the sun die and burying what they love most in the ground, hoping it will come back. I sat with this research for nearly a week before writing a single word. Not because the evidence is thin. The opposite. The evidence is overwhelming. Peer-reviewed, published in Nature Geoscience and Antiquity in Science. Harvard verified. Ice core confirmed. Tree ring corroborated. What stopped me is the gap. The distance between how well documented this catastrophe is and how completely absent it remains from the way most people understand history. The late antique Little Ice Age lasted 124 years. It reshaped every civilization on Earth. It created the Dark Ages, ended the Roman reunification, collapsed cities with populations larger than medieval London, triggered the first bubonic plague pandemic, and rewrote the global economy. It has been confirmed by dendrochronology, glaciology, archaeology, and ancient DNA analysis. And it did not have a name until 2016, a 124-year catastrophe with no name. That is not an oversight. That is a choice, a quiet institutional generational choice, to leave certain questions unasked. Cassiodorus wrote his letter in 538. He described exactly what was happening with the precision of a man who knew no one would believe him. He was right. It took 1,480 years for a Harvard historian to confirm what a Roman statesman already told us. The trees knew. The ice knew. The gold buried in Scandinavian soil knew. The question that will not leave me alone is not what happened in 536. We know what happened. The question is what else sits in the historical record written plainly by people who were there, dismissed for centuries as exaggeration because the truth did not fit the story we had already decided to tell. What other catastrophes have been reclassified as poetry? What other collapses were folded into a phrase like the Dark Ages? As if darkness were simply an era and not an event with a cause, a date, and a body count. If your ancestry traces to Northern Europe, there is a wall somewhere in your family tree. Around the 6th century, Half the population vanished. The records went silent. You carry that silence in your bloodline and never knew why. The trees recorded it. The ice preserved it. The myths encoded it. The gold in the Scandinavian ground still holds the shape of a prayer.